8 perfectly healthy people walked into the admissions offices of various psychiatric hospitals. They all gave the exact same symptom. They claimed they heard a faint voice in their head saying words like thud, empty, hollow. But the moment they were admitted past the locked doors of the psychiatric wards, they stopped faking entirely. They went back to acting completely normal. Yet, not a single doctor, nurse, or psychiatrist noticed they were sane. Instead, every normal thing they did was twisted into proof that they were mentally ill. This is the Rosenhan Experiment, the daring undercover operation that shattered the entire foundation of modern psychiatry. In the early 1970s, a Stanford psychologist named David Rosenhan was deeply troubled by a fundamental question. How do we actually diagnose mental illness? Is it based on objective science, or is it just an educated guess? To find out, he recruited 7 of his friends, including a pediatrician, a painter, a housewife, and several psychologists. He called them the pseudo-patients. Their instructions were incredibly strict. They were to use fake names and fake professions to protect their identities, but everything else about their history, their relationships, and their behavior had to be 100% true. The only lie allowed was the voice in their head saying, thud. Rosenhan assumed the hospital staff would see through the ruse within a couple of days. He was completely wrong. All 8 of them were instantly admitted. 7 of them were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and 1 was diagnosed with manic depressive psychosis. The second the doors locked behind them, the pseudo-patients dropped the act completely. They never mentioned the voices again. If they were asked how they felt, they told the staff they felt fine and no longer heard anything. To pass the time, they walked the hallways, chatted politely with real patients, and took extensive notes about their experiences in small journals. They waited for someone to realize they didn't belong there. Nobody did. Instead, a chilling psychological phenomenon took over the hospital staff: confirmation bias. Once the doctors applied the label of schizophrenic to a person, every single piece of data was filtered through that diagnosis. When the pseudo-patients walked up and down the long hallways out of sheer boredom, the nurses wrote in their charts, "Patient engages in compulsive pacing behavior." When Rosenhan and his friends sat in the day room taking notes in their journals, the staff logged it as an active symptom. Patient exhibits obsessive writing behavior. Even their normal childhood histories were twisted. When one patient explained that they had a warm relationship with their mother, but occasionally argued with their father, the discharge report rephrased it as a deep-seated emotional trauma causing social instability. The system wasn't observing reality, it was observing its own expectations. But while the highly trained staff were completely blind, the actual patients in the ward saw right through them. Because the real patients didn't care about institutional labels, they just observed behavior. During the experiment, dozens of real patients walked up to Rosenhan and the undercover checkers, saying things like, "You're not crazy. You're a journalist or a professor. You're just checking up on the hospital." The people inside the system knew the truth. The people running it were totally oblivious. The pseudo-patients found themselves trapped. They couldn't just walk out. They had to wait to be legally discharged. They were forced to take powerful antipsychotic medications, which they secretly flushed down the toilets. Ultimately, it took anywhere from 7 to 52 days for the healthy volunteers to finally be released. And when they were let out, the hospital didn't admit they had made a mistake. Their files stated they were discharged with schizophrenia in remission. To the hospital, they weren't cured. They were just crazy people who weren't acting out at the moment. When Rosenhan published his findings in the journal Science in 1973, it hit the medical world like a bomb. Psychiatric institutions were furious. One prestigious teaching hospital openly challenged Rosenhan, claiming his study was unfair. They told him, "Send us any number of fake patients over the next 3 months. We dare you. Our doctors will catch every single one of them." Rosenhan accepted the challenge. Over the next 90 days, the hospital staff proudly identified 41 suspected fakers out of 193 patients who walked through their doors. Then, Rosenhan dropped the ultimate trap. He announced that he hadn't actually sent a single fake patient to their hospital. The doctors had turned away 41 genuinely sick human beings who desperately needed help, simply because they were paranoid about being tricked. The traditional takeaway from the Rosenhan experiment is that old-school mental hospitals were broken, or that psychiatric diagnoses are a sham. But that reading misses the deeper, more haunting truth about how the human brain functions. The killer wasn't a lack of medical knowledge. It was the terrifying power of context. We like to believe that we are objective observers of the world. We think we see people for exactly who they are, but the data proves that we don't. When you place a human being into a specific framework, whether it's a psychiatric ward, a prison, a specific corporate job, or a social class, you stop seeing the person. You only see the frame. If a person is in a hospital, their boredom becomes a symptom. If a person is wearing a suit, their nervousness looks like ambition. If a person is wearing rags, their nervousness looks like a threat. We do this every single day of our lives. We categorize people instantly, apply an invisible label, and then spend the rest of our time twisting their completely normal behaviors to fit the story we've already written about them. We build the rooms, we paint the walls, and then we wonder why everyone looks like they belong inside them. The experiment proved that it is frighteningly easy for a sane person to be labeled insane if the environment demands it. But it also leaves us with a much heavier question to carry. How many of the labels we wear today, the ones telling us who is smart, who is broken, who is successful, and who is crazy, are actually real? And how many are just walls we built that we've forgotten how to tear down? The pseudo-patients didn't have a choice once the door is locked. We still do. What happens next is on us.